Well, Luke, it's been a year since Super Tuesday, and I'm starting to think Bernie might not win.
Yes, Michael. A whole year since Super Tuesday. That was the day that our hopes and dreams were dashed when Joe Biden managed to take the crown in that particular contest. And today what we are going to be doing is going through whether Donald Trump would have lost to Bernie Sanders in the 2020 presidential election. And why we are doing this video today is because it is, like you have said, the 1 year anniversary since Super Tuesday. Biden asserted his dominance over the Democratic primary by winning states such as Texas, Maine, and Massachusetts, basically ending the chances of Bernie Sanders or any other candidate from beating him in the primary. The week after, he went and won states such as Michigan, which Bernie won in the 2016 primary, basically confirming he was on an unassailable path to victory and would be the 2020 Democrat nominee. But what if things had turned out differently? What if Barack Obama hadn't intervened in the primary and gotten Amy Klobuchar and Pete Buttigieg to drop out of the race before Super Tuesday and to endorse Biden, enabling Biden to gain the momentum to win states like Texas and Massachusetts? What if Bernie had won Super Tuesday instead, which before South Carolina, I don't know if you remember, Michael, but that seemed very possible, didn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I still have flashbacks to those moments of him peaking in the probabilities on 538.
Yes, when he won Nevada. Oh, what a glorious time that was. But let's assume that he actually did go on and take the nomination, and the Democrats did not try to screw him over, and he would have actually been the party nominee in 2020. I mean, it could have happened, but I guess we're not going to go through the ins and outs of that today any more than we already have done. We are just going to look at whether Bernie Sanders would have beaten Donald Trump in the 2020 election had he had the opportunity to go up against him. It's an interesting question because I think most people think that, yes, he would have beaten Trump in 2016 if he had been nominated instead of Hillary Clinton, but we're going to be having a look at 2020 in this video and the unique year that was. And firstly, to do this, we are going to go through how Joe Biden beat Donald Trump, where he did well and where he didn't do well, to give context on how Bernie could have won and what he would be up against. Sound good, Michael?
Wait, Luke, don't tell me election fraud.
Yes, election fraud. That's how we did it. That's a good one. But no, how did Biden really beat Trump? Well, first off, as many people might be aware, what Biden did tremendously well was win the votes in the affluent suburbs of major cities, not the actual votes within those cities. His percentage dropped compared to Hillary Clinton in 2016, but in the counties and areas around places like Detroit, Milwaukee, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, etc. That was the foundation for his victory and what got him into the White House. Biden did not, however, do well in poorer, less wealthy areas of the country, whether that be within cities or in rural areas. And it was in those rural areas where Trump managed to rack up the votes. Trump again continued his incredible performances in those rural areas like he did in 2016. And what is fascinating about this is looking at Obama's victories in 2008 and 2012 and comparing it to Joe Biden's victory. They couldn't have taken a much different path. Now, the thing with Biden is that, of course, he was Obama's vice president for those two elections, but still, their winning coalitions probably couldn't have been any different. Just take a look at this map from the northern suburbs of Chicago. I saved this map around Christmas, and as you can see, this is the area of Chicago where Home Alone was set. There is the McAllister house that is labelled. It's an incredibly wealthy area, as you'll know if you've seen the movie. Isn't that right, Michael?
No, yeah, it's the classic American comedy trope of an insanely wealthy family.
Yeah, absolutely. I think house prices around here go for more than $1 million. And you just have to look at the contrast between 2012 and 2020 to see the difference in how much better Biden did in these affluent areas. Romney got 55%, while Trump only got 31%. Obama got 43%, while Biden got 67%. That's a massive 24% increase. Let's have a look at a swing state now. This is a map of Wisconsin. You can see that in the suburbs around Milwaukee, compared to 2012, Biden does very well. But in the rest of the rural areas, Trump picks up a lot of votes compared to the 2012 performance of Mitt Romney. And where Wisconsin University is, in Dane County, Biden does especially well there too. And that's because Biden did very well with college-educated voters, far better than Obama did comparatively. But throughout the rest of the state, he doesn't do so well since Trump did very well with non-college educated voters and rural voters who, of course, are most likely to be non-college educated. So yeah, what do you think of that, Michael?
Well, I think it shows the Democrats' forthcoming election-winning strategy of completely abandoning the masses and instead going after the fickle, white, wealthy suburbanites.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Obama comfortably won Wisconsin in 2012, but Biden won Wisconsin, I think, by 10,000 votes. If there had been a 10,000 vote swing, I think Trump would have won that state. And of course, that ended up being, well, it didn't end up being crucial, but it could have easily been crucial in 2020. But essentially, this is how Biden won in 2020. He picked up votes in wealthier areas and sacrificed votes in poorer areas. Those poorer areas that voted for Obama had much higher swings towards Trump. I mean, this enabled Biden to squeak out a narrow victory, winning several states by a few thousand votes. But of course, this video is about Bernie Sanders, and obviously his politics are very different to Biden. I think there is no doubt that Bernie would have not tried to win with the Biden 2020 coalition because of Bernie's politics, and instead would have tried to win like Obama did in 2008 and 2012. The question we are really posing in this video is, could he have done that against Donald Trump, somebody who is far more popular with those voters that Bernie would have targeted and tried to win with than, say, John McCain or Mitt Romney. Donald Trump was incredibly good at getting those voters out for him in 2016 and especially in 2020. He did an incredible job there. So would Bernie have been able to convince them to go back to the Democrats? Well, I guess that's the big question we're going to be asking in this video. So, Michael, you have a point for us that would suggest that, yes, Bernie would have been able to get those voters back to voting Democrats. What is that point?
Well, it's of course a pretty simple one, but it's that the 2020 election was in the midst of a massive pandemic. And even towards the end of the Democratic primary, when it looked as if Biden had it wrapped up, it was frustrating that the pandemic was just kind of kicking into gear, and people were thinking even that probably could have helped Sanders if it would have become more of an issue earlier. It certainly could have helped his campaign, and I certainly think it could have helped his campaign in the election, especially as Donald Trump was dramatically screwing things up.
Well, why would this have been the case, Michael? Why would have coronavirus helped Bernie Sanders' campaign?
Good question. Well, it's of course because Bernie Sanders, I guess his trademark issue was Medicare for all, or universal healthcare. Healthcare was his number one issue, and obviously it's very easy to see how he could have capitalized on that politically in the midst of one of America's worst pandemics ever.
Yeah, the thing is that Bernie could have said, look, if you lose your job, you lose healthcare. Because that is the system that's going on in America right now. A lot of people's healthcare is tied to their employment status. So if they lose employment, then they lose healthcare. Now that would be an issue in a normal recession, but it's an issue especially when that recession is caused by a public health crisis, a pandemic, which can see people lose their jobs and then go into a hospital because of COVID. Like, it's a double whammy. And so Bernie's solution would have killed two birds with one stone. It's like, hey, your health insurance is no longer tied to your employment, so if you lose your job, you're okay. And also, guess what? If you were to contract coronavirus, in the future, I know it would take many years for Medicare for All to get passed, but if you were to contract it and Medicare for All existed, well, that would be better for you, because then you wouldn't have these horrible, massive bills to pay. If you contracted COVID and of course survived and had to be in the hospital for a while. And that's why I think there was, it's unfortunate that Bernie didn't really have the opportunity to make that case to the American people, because, if that couldn't have convinced them to jump on board with Medicare for All this pandemic, I don't know what would have. So yeah, that's the thing. But I think the coronavirus pandemic, like I said before, probably ended up helping Donald Trump to a certain degree, because he could dish out those checks to all those people across America, and Biden didn't make the argument for Medicare for All, or he didn't make the argument for why people need more economic relief. He basically let Trump have that point, and that's why I think he did better among more diverse voters in 2020 who were working class. But Bernie could have articulated a whole different vision for America, and he could have used the COVID pandemic to do that. I think there was no better example of America's broken healthcare system than the year 2020. And yeah, it's a shame, like I said, that Bernie could not have made that argument to the American people.
No, yeah, and I definitely think if he could have, it would have been great for him. And speaking of making the argument, another point for our boy Bernie is that I don't think he would have been passive when it came to the election. I don't think he would have allowed other people to dictate the conversation. And I think that's something which a lot of people who think Bernie wouldn't have won completely miss about him. He would have been able to ensure that he put the focus on the right things. And Have you ever seen the video by Nerdwriter, how Bernie Sanders answers a question?
Yes, I have seen that.
Yeah,
video,
yeah.
yes.
Basically, he gets asked like about healthcare and taxation, and he's very quick to put the focus on. He says, that the premium basically functions as a tax, and actually in practice you're paying less for your healthcare. So he's very good at taking kind of a question and putting the focus on the right thing. And I think he would definitely be able to do that, especially against Donald Trump, who mostly just kind of blusters. And I also think that the moderate Democrats tend to be, I think you made the point, and I can't remember the video, but I'll link it right now once I found it, so you'll be able to see it appear right now, that basically Biden didn't really sell a moderate vision as a thing in itself. He wasn't out there kind of presenting this fantastic neoliberal vision of what was possible with sensible evidence-based policies. He was just there going, soul of the nation. And therefore, because the Democrats didn't bother to define a clear vision under Biden, it meant that lots of people who are on the right wing of the American political spectrum saw the Democrats as communists anyway, because the Democrats didn't even bother, the moderate Dems didn't even bother to provide a counter-narrative. So I think being able to stand there and say clearly what it is you're fighting for actually works very strongly. I think that's the most effective vaccine, if you will, immunization against people mischaracterizing your position. Bernie wouldn't have just been sat there going blah, 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 and people wouldn't be calling him a communist. No, he would have been presenting his actual ideas for people to absorb.
Yes, I think that's a very good point. One thing that people commented on in the Trump-Biden debates was how policy-free it all was. And I remember in the second debate, they didn't actually have a policy disagreement until 45 minutes into the actual debate, where Biden said he was for a $15 minimum wage. And I think after the debate, that was the most searched thing online in America. And that's the thing. He said that, but that wasn't a central part of his campaign. That was just something that he had, but he didn't use it as much as he should have, considering, he lost Florida, and the $15 minimum wage passed there with 60% of the vote in that state. He could have used that policy, but he did not. Instead, he just said soul of a nation over and over again and talked about how bad Trump was without articulating a clear difference. You could not say that about Bernie Sanders. He would have been on the forefront. He would have been articulating a vision for America, which would have been his vision. And of course, some people would have not liked it, but I think a lot of people, considering, there was a pandemic going on and the amount of, poverty in America, they would have liked it. They would have liked to see the $15 minimum wage that Bernie would have made central to his campaign. They would have liked to see Medicare for all, especially because of the pandemic. Like, Bernie would have been, without a doubt, on the front foot trying to convince people because of his policies to vote for him. And that, I think, is absolutely crucial. I think that's how Obama did so well back in the day, just referencing him again. And that's why I think, it's a good point for Bernie. And so, I think overall the difference between Bernie and Biden in terms of how aggressive they would be is something that would have been quite stark and would have definitely helped Bernie win in 2020.
Absolutely. And do you know what else would have helped Bernie win in 2020? I've got another reason for you, Luke.
Tell me, Michael.
There would be no alternative options really for moderates. Now, this one, it's maybe a bit more speculative. I think it's possibly not as strong as the other reasons, but quite simply put, when you had somebody like Biden out there, lots of progressives, lots of Bernie or bust folks were saying, I can vote for the Greens. And obviously they could have voted for more radical parties, but the Greens are a pretty major party in the United States and certainly a very valid protest vote. So lots of progressives could have voted for the Greens in opposition to Joe Biden, and indeed, I imagine a lot did. However, there isn't really that option for moderates. Moderates don't really have an option in this election. And I also think these people would have been unlikely to abstain from voting, because I think when you look at where are people the most moderate, I think a very common place is the suburbs, the places where Joe Biden, of course, famously won. And those people have a very strong sense, I think, of, first of all, being invested in politics, and second of all, having this idea of civic duty in a way that I certainly think. Yes. So they would be unlikely to abstain from voting. They would probably want to go out and vote. And at that point, it's just a matter of, who are they going to go for? And they don't have an option other than Sanders or Trump. So there is no third party option for the moderates, which I think would be a strength.
And you'd say enough of them would be like, hey, I don't like Bernie Sanders, but he's the lesser of the two evils compared to Trump. That's what, because they hate Trump so much, as evidenced by Biden absolutely blowing Trump out of the water in those areas. And that's the thing. I think that is fascinating. Like, would Bernie get those suburban votes? Like, not as much as Biden, but would he still, for example, in that map we showed earlier of northern Chicago, would he win that? Like Romney won it in 2012. Would Bernie win that in 2020? That would be a fascinating question, really. Because here's the thing. Those people in the suburbs, are those people who watch CNN and MSNBC, and they absolutely despise Trump, like more than anyone else. Right? The phrase "vote blue no matter who" was used against Bernie, but would it have been used for Bernie as well? I think about how many people on Twitter used to say that Bernie is like Trump. I was thinking, would those people sit out or maybe even vote for Trump? Now, my initial instinct was no, because I think ultimately those kind of people that we're talking about would have been like, I'm sorry, I don't like Bernie, but Trump is the worst. Like, anybody but him. I think that would have been the bottom line. But I think those like suburban moderate types who watch cable news, one of the reasons why I think they think like that is because those cable news channels that these moderates watch, that of course aren't Fox News, went at Trump with vigour and attacked him every single day. I mean, deservedly, I'd say. But if you're tuning on MSNBC, you're not going to hear anything pro-Trump, or even CNN. And that's why I think these people absolutely despise Trump. But if Bernie was the nominee, would these cable news channels still be doing that like they did when Biden was the nominee? Or would the cable news channels compare Trump to Bernie and saying, hey, you know what, there isn't that much difference between them? I mean, think about what happened with Black Lives Matter in the summer. I think it is likely there would have been a cable news narrative that said both of these candidates appeal mainly to white people, that these candidates, Trump and Bernie, aren't going to fix this problem. They are both white men, etc. I mean, they didn't do that even though Biden is a white man, but, there's ideological reasons for that. I think there is a very high chance that these suburbanites who hated Trump so much possibly wouldn't have in November 2020 because the cable news channels would have been saying, well, Trump and Bernie, they're both bad. And in doing so, would have tried to shift people to vote away from Bernie because, of course, for them, Bernie is probably as far away ideologically as Trump is from them. And, of course, who's going to raise taxes on them, or who's going to get more viewers in seats? Well, Bernie's going to probably push up taxes, and Trump is going to probably get those viewers to watch their channels. So I think, yes, those people absolutely despise Trump. But if the cable news channels switch tactic, maybe they wouldn't. I don't know, but it is an interesting thing to think about, Michael.
Yeah, and I do think it's definitely true that the role of the media in wanting to slander Sanders cannot be overstated. I mean, how can we forget the moment where the moderator in that debate just assumes that Elizabeth Warren's narrative is correct about Sanders being a sexist who thinks that women can't win the election? There was some obvious bias against Sanders in the primary, and while you would expect that to be lessened in theory in the general when he's up against Trump, it's certainly true that you can't guarantee that the media would actually view Sanders as the lesser evil, because ultimately a Sanders presidency would go against their economic interests.
Yeah, and also their ideology as well. I think Biden probably goes against their economic interests like Trump, but I think it's clear that many people who are working in cable news, like Biden, like his ideology was very very near to them. And yeah, I think definitely the news would have been a lot harsher to Bernie compared to Biden. I think about some tweets I saw. I can't remember what it was, but the day Biden got inaugurated, there was this cable news person tweeting that when they were in Nevada for the primary, which of course Bernie won handily over Biden, in the ad breaks, everyone on their channel was so depressed because, Bernie looked like he was going to be the nominee and Biden looked like he was going to lose. Like, there was genuine depression. Like, they really, really hated Bernie Sanders. That cannot be overstated. Maybe it's forgotten now, but I'm sure if you cast your memory back to a year ago while he was in the thick of the primary battle with Biden, maybe you can conjure up some memories of the ridiculous articles and attacks from the news media against Bernie Sanders. And that might have meant, like I said, those suburban moderates turning out for Trump a lot more than they did against him in 2020, and that could have tipped the balance in several important states for Trump. And on that note, Michael, shall we move on to the next point against Bernie Sanders?
Absolutely. Against him? Oh, you just hate Bernie, don't you?
I know, right? But here's the thing. We know from our own country, Michael, what happens when a left-wing leader of a major political party takes over and enters a general election. There can be some shenanigans going on. My question is, would the Democrats have sabotaged Bernie Sanders? We, like I said, are aware of what happened in 2017 with Jeremy Corbyn in the UK when the Labour Party systematically basically tried to sabotage him by not sending resources to the proper constituencies and basically costing Corbyn probably a few more seats that may have made the difference between him being Prime Minister and not. Like, the margins were that thin in the 2017 general election. And who knows how different things could have been if Corbyn had been Prime Minister after 2017. It is my fundamental belief that the Democrats at the top of the party would not care if Trump won or Bernie won, because they would be out of power. Their faction would no longer be in charge. So the question is, this is what I'm unsure about, maybe they would have sabotaged Bernie. Although American politics doesn't work like UK politics does. If Bernie had lost, nobody would get the leadership of the Democratic Party for another 4 years, since they don't have a permanent opposition leader like in the UK. It's like a different structure. So that may count against it, but still, I think they would have hated Bernie as much as they would have hated Trump. And he is on their side. He does caucus for them in the Senate. But I don't know, Michael, we've seen the lengths that people can go surprisingly to get power back when they lose it, especially if all you believe in is power and you don't really have ideological goals that you want to pursue. And that is basically the Democratic Party. They don't really care about anything apart from getting the people in charge into, the better positions. Like that, they don't really have any care apart from that. So yeah, I think there could have been a case where Bernie would have been sabotaged by the Dems in some way or another, but I don't know if it's as likely as what happened in the UK with Jeremy Corbyn. What do you think?
Yeah, I think you pretty much made a sufficient number of interesting points. There is the fact that party politics is fundamentally different between our two countries. I mean, obviously there is the case that Obama quite sabotaged Sanders by trying to get everyone to rally behind him, and we do have evidence. I guess there was obviously the DNC emails, of course, that showed that the party establishment was against Bernie Sanders. But in a general election, I think it's true to say that the parties, as they exist as entities, hate each other more than they hate anybody within their parties. And I think I pretty much agree with you that they wouldn't care that Sanders lost, and I think there would definitely be less enthusiasm from the Democratic establishment, although I don't think that would necessarily hurt Sanders too much, because I think the Democratic establishment is not that well viewed in America, especially amongst the people that Sanders would be likely to be getting a lot of his votes from and a lot of his big electoral shifts from. But I also don't think they would the establishment, hate Sanders or actively want him to lose. They would just be passive, I imagine.
No, well, I'd say they definitely hate him. I would say yes, they definitely do. But do they hate him enough to sabotage him? Especially when the alternative is Donald Trump. That's the thing. It's kind of the same thing as the suburban voters before. Like, would they go that extra mile to not vote for him, to not have Bernie Sanders as president if it meant Donald Trump? I don't know, man. I really don't know. That would be something that would be very interesting. But let's move on to the final point, anyway, against Bernie Sanders, which is maybe Trump would just have too much sway with white working class voters, who, of course, were non-college educated because of Trump's cultural power. You see, white non-college voters flipped to Trump in 2016 in a massive way, and that's because of the cultural force of Trump. And white non-college educated voters absolutely loved him. They were the section of people that adored him because of what he said about immigrants, his general non-PC attitude. He wasn't afraid of making jokes, say, about disabled people or women. Like, they loved that. Like, he was a cultural force. So much so that white non-college voters increased their share of the vote in 2020, showing that Trump managed to get the most out of that demographic. And because they loved him so much, that there is this danger that Trump could have overpowered Bernie Sanders with these voters. I think in the 2020 presidential election, the quote-unquote Obama-Trump voters, those who voted for Obama and those who voted for Trump, I think 90% of them in 2020 returned and voted for Trump, just like they did in 2016, and Biden only won 10% of them, just showing like the massive challenge that Biden faced and also Bernie Sanders would face. I mean, Trump changed what it meant to be a Democrat. A Democrat now, in the mind of these voters, was somebody who was trusting of institutions and society as a whole. I mean, Trump basically polarized people, not on policies, but things like trust. Trump's rise in 2016 wasn't because of material reasons, and that is why, for me, it is quite interesting as to whether Bernie could win back these people with material arguments that he, of course, would have made. Obama talked about economic issues and focused on class. I remember in the 2012 election, there was the story that, of course, Mitt Romney said that 47% of the population didn't work and were basically useless. That got leaked when he was doing his campaign, and basically the Obama team made sure every single voter in the state of Ohio, particularly in those lower middle class areas, heard that phrase from Romney, that 47% of people basically didn't work. Everyone heard about it. It was quite a populist campaign, quite contrary to the man himself. Clinton and Biden did not do this, and that allowed Trump also to pull more African American and Latino voters along with white working class voters. And essentially the question is, were these people gone forever? Could Bernie get them back if he ran in 2020 in the presidential election? Or was Trump's influence over these people just too much? I mean, they voted for Obama. Could they go back and vote for Trump? I mean, you think about Ohio, like, for instance, a state Obama won twice. Like, Ohio was lost each time in 2016 and 2020 by 9% by Clinton and Biden. I mean, that is just a massive gap. And, you know, it seems to me so difficult for like Bernie to win Ohio. But the thing is, Obama did it. And so that's why, in my mind, Michael, I don't know about you, but I keep thinking, like, Trump, these voters absolutely love Trump so much. But then again, Obama, you know, won like Ohio. So maybe you could have persuaded enough of them to vote for him to make a difference. But I'm not sure, Michael. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question, actually, because I do think it's true that it takes a while for these. It's not as if voters just always go into an election each time as a blank slate. What's happened in the previous elections is going to affect them. Obviously, coming out of the Obama presidency, you did have this massive polarization between white working class voters and white college educated voters. And obviously, we saw that in the 2016 election. And Ohio does have a reputation as being kind of almost the peak white working class state, as you kind of implied by making it your focus point. And yeah, I do think it's true that the Democrats have come to be seen as the elite establishment party in a very real way, and obviously Trump was a big part of creating that. I think it's the issue is I don't think you can say that Bernie would come in and just completely undo everything Trump did in terms of characterizing the Democratic Party as the enemy of the common man. I think that he's not going to be able to overturn all of it, especially when I think you'd still have other members of the Democratic Party saying things and doing things to foment that image. But I think it's certainly true Sanders would have had some effect. I don't think he could have had as much of an effect, because obviously you look at Obama winning in 2012. I mean, that was against Romney. Kind of Romney was the peak, barely even human, just super rich guy. He just gave off that kind of movie villain energy, like, you know, the Lex Luthor kind of. So he was kind of peak, whereas of course Trump isn't that. So it's certainly, Bernie wouldn't have done anything like as well as Obama did in 2012, because obviously he was against a different opponent, and the Democratic Party had not been tainted in the way it had post-Trump in 2012.
Yeah, that is also what I agree with. That's good analysis, I think. Like I mentioned before, like John McCain, Mitt Romney, they are so far different to Donald Trump. So although Obama did win those voters that Trump eventually won, it also, you know, needs to be pointed out that who Obama was facing is very different to Trump. And I think that is pretty key. So yeah, I think Bernie would have done, of course, better than Clinton and Biden, but he wouldn't have done as well as Obama in getting those white working class non-college educated voters to vote for the Democrats. I think it's pretty impossible. Like Trump did change the game forever in that regard, and you know, going forward, you know, not just looking at hypotheticals for 2020, going forward looking at 2024, 2028, you know, the Democrats really, well, they don't need to capture, you know, that demographic back. Like Biden just won this election by not doing it. But if, you know, I guess progressive people in America want to see serious change, they're going to have to win those voters back, because that will give them a mandate, you know, running on a left-wing, economically progressive platform to change America in the way it needs to be changed, like Medicare for all, like minimum wage increase that actually is a proper increase. You know, that kind of stuff matters. So, you know, that's a question that we posed right in this video, but it is going to be a big question going forward as well for the Democratic coalition. And overall, Michael, I'd say on the overall question, would Bernie have won? I mean, at the end of the day, like, who knows, you know, you'd have a completely different outcome compared to Biden in terms of voters. You know, you could have come up with a very similar map or a very different map. You know, I think the most likely outcome would be something similar to the 2012 election, with Obama winning comfortably over Romney. Obama won the states of Florida, Iowa, and Ohio. I don't think Bernie would have won that. I think Bernie actually, ironically, would have got the exact same map as Hillary Clinton, apart from winning Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, which would have given him the presidency. So yeah, Michael, your final thoughts, please?
No, yeah, I think ultimately I agree with you. And I was interested going into this because I was thinking, you know, I honestly don't know. And I was interested in having this discussion with you. But I think perhaps maybe predictably the end result of this discussion has been that we still don't know, but in a slightly more nuanced way.
Yes, I think that sums up the whole situation well. Yes, I'll say we don't know in a slightly more nuanced way, but probably.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, just probably Bernie would have won. And then we would have been entering into a utopia. No doubt about that. Oh, wouldn't things have just been great if he won, Michael?
And make sure to join us in our next video for Can Bernie Win in 2024?
Yep, we're still hoping. We're still hoping.